Mexico is in fashion in Hollywood. While Donald Trump keeps trying to build the wall at the southern border, Mexican movie directors have won 5 out of the past 6 Oscars for Best Director. But as talented as Mexicans are in the film industry, they are far less lucky when it comes to politics. A year ago, we told you how the country of Guillermo del Toro ended up having years of bipartisan politics that led to rampant corruption. For a better understanding, the country's latest president, Enrique Peña Nieto, left office with the worst ratings any Mexican president has ever had. And this is how the new president began his term. Of course, we're talking about Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, also known as AMLO, the new Mexican left-wing rock star. He is the first president to win more than 30 million votes. That's a landslide victory. And it's even more surprising if we take into account that he didn't come from either of the 2 major political parties. Mexicans wanted a radical change, and that's exactly what AMLO promised. The question is now, is he delivering? And Eric is going to give us the answer.
Truth be told, yes, things are changing in Mexico, and they're changing for the worse. The GDP growth rate was 2% in 2018, but in 2019, they're only projected to grow about 0.2%. Yeah, so far it seems like Mexico is heading towards a recession.
And yes, I know what you're thinking. Come on, Simon, the brand new Mexican president hasn't even been in office for a year. Can we really blame him for what's going on in the country? Well, today we are going to answer this question, but before we do, let's take a look back at the history.
The Revenant.
Yes, I'm sure many of you have watched the movie The Revenant. The Mexican director Alejandro González Iñárritu won his 2nd Oscar for Best Director with that film. But the real Revenant in this story is AMLO. He started his career as a member of one of those 2 big Mexican political parties, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, also known as the PRI. This used to be the country's big center-left party. But AMLO soon realized that this party wasn't far enough to the left for him, so he created his own spin-off that led him to become mayor of Mexico City. This is how AMLO became famous nationwide. Then in 2006 he ran for president but lost by 250,000 votes. Instead of accepting these results, AMLO started several protests and his supporters claimed that he was the legitimate president. Then he ran again for president in 2012 with even worse results. At the time, it really looked as if his career was over. Yes, nobody would invest a penny in AMLO's future, but then, against the odds, he rose from the ashes with a brand new political party, Morena. His program was very simple: destroy everything the previous administrations had done in Mexico and start from scratch. And well, boy, in a country so politically dysfunctional and corrupt and poverty-stricken as Mexico, this formula couldn't have worked better. And let's be honest here, AMLO isn't disappointing anyone. You see, in Mexico, after winning the elections, you have to wait 5 months before you really start being president. During this time, the would-be president just waits. But AMLO used this 5 months to hold lots of referendums. His idea was that as soon as he started his term, he would already have a list of popular policies ready to be implemented. And so now you might say, well, that doesn't sound like such a bad idea. I mean, you guys at VisualPolitik, you've already praised direct democracy in countries like Liechtenstein and Switzerland, so, I mean, you gotta be big AMLO fans, right? And yes, you're right, referendums can be pretty cool, but they must have guarantees and be organized by the government. When a political party organizes referendums by themselves without any controls, it's usually a bit of a joke. And, well, this is exactly what AMLO's been doing. For most of these referendums, only about 1 in 5 municipalities actually had voting cabins, and the elections, they were so rigged that, well, I mean, just look at this news.
A person could vote 4 times on the referendum about the new airport.
But this is not the end of the story. You see, when we talk about referendums, the way we write the question can have a huge impact on the outcome. In other words, if you change the wording, you can easily manipulate the result. For example, if I ask, do you agree with increasing old people's pensions? Or do you want a better healthcare system? Well, most of you are going to say yes. And these are the sorts of questions that the Morena party was asking. So, how many citizens voted? Well, most of the referendums had a turnout of less than 1%, about equal to the percentage of absolute die-hard AMLO supporters. And of course, all these policies had more than 90% approval ratings. Of course, none of these referendums had any legal binding, but they have been the perfect way for AMLO to justify all of his decisions. At the end of the day, I mean, he's just doing what citizens want. Right? So now you might be wondering, well, what kind of decisions is AMLO making? Well, here's an example. Cancelling the construction of Mexico City's new international airport. We don't know if the project was good or bad, but the truth is that it costs $13 billion, of which $5 billion were already spent. So basically, Mexico has just thrown $5 billion out of the window. And now you might be wondering, well, why did he do that? Well, that's easy. One of those referendums where only 1% of the population voted said that the public agreed with cancelling construction. In a way, you can argue that many other politicians base their policies on polls, but the difference is that AMLO sees this as a real legal instrument.
We're going to govern like this, asking the people. They say that in order to make mistakes, the best policy is to ask. This is democracy. It's not the decision of one man or two or three.
Again, the problem is not making referendums. In fact, Mexican law already has legislation in place to regulate how to make popular consultations. But of course, you need an independent body to run the process, and you need to reach a certain turnout. Until this year, 2019, this turnout was 40% of voters. But of course, AMLO has already changed this. Now 25% is enough. 25% of Mexican voters is around 20 million people, but there are consultations in which less than 1 million people voted. In other words, for AMLO, direct democracy is pretty undemocratic. But wait a minute, because we aren't done yet. Apart from consultations, what has AMLO done in the few months since he's been in power? Well, he's been pretty busy. Check it out.
AMLO world.
AMLO's presidency can be summarized in one iconic gesture. Unlike his predecessors, he didn't want to live in the Los Pinos Palace. You might say, well, that's great, he's a man of the people. But the question is, where do you think he went instead? Did he remain at home? No, of course not. He went to the National Palace. In other words, he just switched one palace for the other. And what do you think he did with the Los Pinos Palace? The palace has now become a cultural center. The first big event was a public screening of Roma, the movie directed by Alfonso Cuarón in order to promote Mexican movies. And in this regard, we must admit he was pretty transparent.
The Ministry of Culture will have to report how much they spend in popcorn and punch during the projection of Roma in Los Pinos.
Okay, but let's be clear here. Projecting Roma in the Los Pinos Palace is not a bad thing, but it's not a good thing either. But what actually has negative consequences for the economy and does scare investors away are decisions like cancelling the construction of the airport and changing all the deals the previous government had signed with private contractors. And this explains news like this.
Mexico falls 8 positions in the foreign direct investment ranking. Also, Mexico fell to the last position in the ranking prepared by A.T. Kearney.
And the same goes for energy reform. You see, after decades of having a state monopoly, the Mexican oil company, Pemex, couldn't be more corrupt. They had an enormous amount of debt, and if it wasn't for the government's support, they would have gone bankrupt years ago. The previous president, Nieto, opened the market for foreign investment. He started by auctioning the smallest oil fields off to anybody who wanted to exploit them. The goal was to increase production and generate more money. The first thing AMLO did as soon as he got into office was freeze all those public auctions. He wants Mexico's oil industry to remain the way it was. And this is a problem because the country has a big management issue in this regard. For example, even though Mexico has oil reserves, it imports 70% of its gasoline from the United States, which leads to higher gas prices. Why does it import so much? Well, it's mainly because Pemex is so mismanaged that their production falls every year. So how is AMLO trying to solve this? Well, of course, by building a brand new refinery. The problem? Pemex has no money, and Mexico isn't growing, so, well, where's he going to get the money? Well, that's a very good question.
Mexican government and Pemex announcement of building a new refinery raises many doubts.
So far, all the contractors that have been participating in the bidding claimed that the conditions the government requested were not realistic. They want the refinery too early and for too little money. But I guess we're going to have to wait to 2022 to see who's right. But we can already judge the success of the education reform. This is another project started by the previous president that was stopped by AMLO. In this case, Mexico had a unique educational system. In most countries, teachers have to pass an exam in order to be hired by a public school, but not in Mexico. In this case, it's the teachers' union that controls the hiring process, and a teaching position can be sold or even inherited. Yep, you heard that right. You can inherit a teacher's job from your father, and you don't even need to prove that you know the subjects that you're going to teach. This is why Mexico changed the system and introduced a national exam. It would be changed to a system similar to Spain's, but in Mexico, the change sparked extremely violent protests, especially in the south of the country. Thousands of teachers retired before having to pass the exam, and more than 1,000 teachers were fired because after 3 attempts they couldn't pass. Most of them, of course, got another job at the administration. But don't worry, this is all history. One of the most vocal AMLO supporters during the campaign were those teachers' unions, so, well, now he's returning the favor by going backwards on all those reforms. So Mexican teachers will once again enjoy their privileges, and Mexican kids will keep failing all their exams. But by far the most controversial thing AMLO has done involves his war against the narcos. When Mexico was ruled by the right wing, it passed a law to allow the military to fight the narcos. This definitely didn't work. In the last 12 years, Mexico has had more than 250,000 deaths linked directly to the war on drugs. AMLO has promised that he would stop the war. So what did he do? Well, instead of using the military, he's created a brand new body called the National Guard. And who's a part of this National Guard? Well, of course, that would be former soldiers. Even the leader is a former military officer. So basically, AMLO changed everything to keep everything the same. And the same is happening with lots of social programs and even the Mexico City airport. We talked about that before, and you might think that he did it to save money, but not really. That money is being reinvested in another project with a more dubious utility, and that's the Mayan Train. This train will cross the southern Mexico states, which would be great if those regions were more developed. So with no people or goods to transport, it's wishful thinking to believe that this is going to push development in the region. But, well, this still isn't the worst thing.
Mayan organizations ask AMLO to stop the construction of the Mayan Train.
So far, the project hasn't passed any of the environmental impact studies, but still, AMLO's administration keeps on trying. In this political climate, where the president isn't listening to anybody, it's easy to understand why foreign investors are leaving the country by the dozen. And this has already had an impact on the country's economic growth. So now we must ask you, do you think AMLO will manage to avoid a recession in Mexico, or do you think that the money that's running away from the country will never come back? Well, please leave your answer in the comments section below, and don't forget to visit reconsidermedia.com, the podcast that provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, we publish brand new videos every week, so please do subscribe to VisualPolitik and hit that bell button so you won't miss any posts. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more